What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to... I don't even know if we have a name for this show, to be honest with you. I think it's just called Mad Lab. A couple things to go over before we jump into this card, which obviously now we're going on a run of really good cards. This card's really good. A lot of big names, not name value, and up until like middle of May, June, great cards. Plus, we got some really good boxing coming up. So we're not going to be complaining so much about these Contender Series jobbers coming in and these guys that they're trying to put hype on. A lot of the guys that we're going to see on these main cards of these fights coming up, they have names, they have value, they've got past that hype machine already. So looking forward to that. Plus, like I said, we got some good boxing coming up. But before we jump into this, I think we would be doing a disservice to combat sports if we didn't bring up a couple deaths that happened this week. One of them was Livingston Bramble. Those of you who don't know who he is, he was a very good boxer, best known for his fights with Boom Boom Mancini. But most importantly, a guy that's near and dear to my heart, just for the mere fact that he represents everything that the big man stands for, Big George Foreman. And little history about him for the new guys that really don't follow boxing, but just to go through the legacy of this guy's career. You know, he was on both sides of history. You know, a very good part of history, and then kind of like not an embarrassing part of history, but on the wrong end of it. This is a guy who, you know, Olympic gold medalist in 1968 in Mexico City. Overall record, I believe his overall record was 76. I want to say 76-5, and he had 68 KOs. But the crazy thing about his career, I mean, he fought everybody. He fought in an era of heavyweights where everybody was good. I mean, even the guys that weren't good, they had some kind of an attribute. You know, the Ronnie Lyles, the obviously Muhammad Ali's, the Joe Frazier's. You know, so many good Kenny Norton, so many good guys, like so many really all star. They had a star-studded cast back then of heavyweights. All of them were very dangerous. All of them can beat each other on any given night. Obviously, he was on the right side of history when he beat Frazier for the title. And the crazy thing about that was he, at that point in time, he was pretty much feared by everybody. He was considered the hardest heavyweight puncher of all time over guys like Rocky Marciano. Now, you can argue about Rocky Marciano because he was so small. He was 180 pounds, 185 pounds. So you could say like maybe pound for pound, no. But at the time, he was just one of the most feared men on the planet. Just beating everybody, knocking everybody out. And then, obviously, the fight comes along with Muhammad Ali. And this is where he was on the wrong side of history. And the crazy thing about that fight is nobody gave Ali a chance in that fight. He was 32, 33 years old, I believe. He definitely lost some reflexes. He lost some speed. And people were just looking at this fight like this is like suicide for Ali to come in here and fight this animal. And it looked like that in the very beginning. In the very beginning of the fight, Foreman was kind of all over him. Hitting him to the body, hitting him to the head, hitting him to the body, hitting him to the head. And lo and behold, I mean, we all knew the genius of Muhammad Ali, but we never knew that he would take a chance like this to set up such a beautiful rope-a-dope. And as the fight went on, he literally was just taking punishment. And I firmly believe fights like this is what kind of derailed, you know, Muhammad Ali from his faculties when he got older, because he was just willing to take so much damage. He was willing to die in there. And he was getting beaten to a pulp in there for a good 6-7 rounds. You know, Foreman was just taking it to him. And then Foreman said, this is his quote, that he's like, Ali just leaned into me and whispered in my ear, "Is that all you got, George?" And he literally just started teeing off on him. He used his conditioning against him, and the genius of Muhammad Ali beat him and took the belt. So that was like he was on both sides of history. He was considered like this God-feared, this crazy powerful man that almost could just a movable force to, you know, facing a guy in Ali that nobody gave Ali a chance because obviously he was kind of on the decline. And Ali beats him. After that, you know, he's obviously continued to fight. He fought, I remember, Jimmy Young. And in that fight, you know, you got to remember, back then fights were 15 rounds. You know, so in that fight, and they took the 15 rounds off, believe it or not, with Boom Boom Mancini when he fought Dooku Kim in Las Vegas, Nevada. Dooku Kim obviously died in that fight, and then lo and behold, we knocked it down to 12 rounds. But the crazy thing about Foreman was when he was in that fight, he went back to the locker room. and he had serious heat stroke. He was seriously dehydrated. He thought he was going to die. Foreman literally thought he was going to die after that fight. And he was praying to God. He really wasn't a God-fearing man back then, but he was praying to God. He was, everything you can imagine. And when he got out of it, that's when he became kind of a born-again Christian. He retired from boxing. He went on a hiatus for about 10 years. He became a preacher. And then 10 years later, Foreman comes back. I believe he was 39 years old. And he came back for an odd reason. He didn't really come back for the love of the sport. I mean, obviously, he loved the sport. But his initial reason for coming back was he was trying to generate money for for this like foundation. And obviously, at that time, you had the youngest heavyweight champion in the world. You had Mike Tyson, where everybody, all this crazy buzz, was about Mike Tyson. And you could totally see by his style when he came back to fight that he changed things a little bit. Your power is always the last thing to go. But obviously, at his age now, being 10 years away from the ring, things had to be adjusted. And the biggest adjustment that he made was he used to use this cross-guard defense, and he adopted that from Archie Moore. Archie Moore was a fantastic heavyweight fighter back in the day, and it was just an easier way to block. You didn't have to put your hands up. You didn't have to be so fast. It was just kind of a wall. He had these big lumbering arms, and it was just like a wall he would put up. Now, there are some flaws in that. You can get caught with some uppercuts if you're not tight enough and stuff. But overall, you're creating a barrier, and that's what Foreman used to use. And it was very hard to penetrate because he used to just use it to kind of bulldoze you forward and use his guard to block shots, and then he would throw these steaming shots at you that had no speed behind them. But when they landed, they landed. And obviously we know, the crazy thing about that was after he started having success at his age, seeing that this is what the heavyweight division is, he wanted to make a run. He wanted to go after Tyson. And oddly enough, in 1990, Don King put them both on the same card to see what kind of interest it would draw. And it was Mike Tyson versus Henry Tillman, and it was George Foreman versus Addison Rodriguez. Tyson knocked Tillman out. Foreman knocked Rodriguez out. And now the talks began. Now, all of a sudden, Don King, because he was a capitalist, let's face it, Don King was trying to express to him, listen, this is the fight to make. He's over the hill. He's slow, but he's still a huge name. You know how it is with MMA and stuff like that. You get these guys that are Tony Ferguson, monster names, and you're like, well, get the name on your resume. Just like Tyson did with Larry Holmes. He took advantage of Larry Holmes that way. He took Larry Holmes when he was well out of his prime. And Tyson even said that in an interview after the fight. He goes, it's great to have the name on the record, but I'm not sure that fight would have went the same way if Larry Holmes was in his prime. So, like, he even, Don King would do things to kind of, he was just not a, he was a great promoter when it came to giving the crowd and the people great fights, because he was involved in so many great fights, but he was shitty to his fighters. He was horrible to his fighters. He was horrible to Tyson, stole money, but he knew that was a huge money fight. Tyson versus Foreman. You had two big punchers, the puncher of yesterday to the puncher of today, and Tyson did not want to fight him. And that's a true story. Tyson said to him, I don't want to fight that animal. If you love him so much, you fight him. And this was when Foreman was in his 40s. Like, he was this guy wasn't in his prime anymore. He was on a 10-year layoff. He was fighting. He was winning fights, but he was well past his prime. And Tyson didn't want anything to do with it. 2 years later, Tyson goes to prison. In that time, Foreman became the heavyweight champion at almost 46 years old, and when he knocked out Michael Moore in 1994. He retired at 49 with a record of 76-5 with 68 KOs. He was only knocked out one time. I mean, the guy was just a special person. Obviously, a lot of people do know him for the George Foreman grill. Funny story about that, he made a fortune off that. Obviously, everybody knows. Everybody at one time had a George Foreman grill. But that grill was, before it was offered to George Foreman, it was offered to Hulk Hogan. And Hulk Hogan turned it down. So think about that financial mistake. Hogan turned that grill down, and he decided to go with something called the Hulkamania Meatball Maker. Because if you remember back in the day, during Rocky and stuff, he used to call people the Ultimate Man to the Ultimate Meatball. So and it bombed, literally bombed. So imagine being Hulk Hogan and sitting in your house, because we all know Hogan had some serious financial problems and stuff, knowing that he could have been the name on the Foreman grill. It could have been the Hulk Hogan grill, the Hulkamania grill, whatever they were going to call it, but he turned it down. So a lot of people know Foreman as this happy-go-lucky guy, very, jolly, big George Foreman, always smiling, laughing. And he was that guy before he passed away. He was always, but in his prime, he was the most feared man on the planet. He was not that guy. He was not that smiling George Foreman with the bald head, the jolly grandpa. He just was not that guy. All his sons, too, were named George. He had a bunch of kids, and he named them all George. But back in the day, if you go back and watch his films against Frazier, when he took Frazier off his feet with a shot, he literally was not the guy that you would see before he passed away. He was not that jolly guy. He was a very stoic, quiet, just animal. So that is a huge, huge loss. He was honestly a national treasure, to us. He really, really was. The things that he's accomplished, the things that he's been through, the things that after his first retirement, coming back and just showing the world, like, I can do this again. You can do this again, despite what age you are. To kind of expose the heavyweight division, to show them, like, I'm in my 40s and I'm coming into the young man's game and I'm beating you guys. That was kind of stamping a flag for the heavyweights from back in the day, to say we were the generation, not you guys. We were the Alis, the Lyles, the Foremans. Like, we were that generation. Floyd Patterson, Archie Moore. Like, it was just a different breed of fighter back then. Like, we haven't had a heavyweight division like that. I don't think we ever will again. I mean, if you really think about it, think about all the greats. All the greats were in that era. Kenny Norton, Ronnie Lyle, Floyd Patterson, Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, Foreman. I mean, think about that heavyweight division. It was star-studded, stacked. So terrible, terrible, terrible. 76 or 78, 76 or 78. I'm not sure how old he was. I think he was 78. Apparently, he had some dementia. He had some other issues. I don't know the full details of how he passed away, why he passed away. But apparently he did have some health issues. And I guess that's why we haven't seen him publicly in a long time. You don't realize it when you don't see him. But now that I think about it, I'm like, yeah, come to think of it, I haven't seen him do any kind of public interviews. And he was a real public guy. He was a guy who, always wanted to talk, and he was always happy and always jolly and totally different from what he was. But come to think of it, we haven't seen him in just so long, so, really, really, really terrible. I was really upset. That was one thing I was really upset to see. I mean, it affected me almost as much as Ali, when Ali died. So, prayers go up to him, and we should all be very, very thankful that we were able to see him, and maybe not see him in his prime, but we got to actually see him when he came back and have the fights with Holyfield and the big upset against Michael Moore, and just to be able to witness a guy like that walking this earth was a tremendous honor. So thank you for everything, George. All right, let's get into some happier things now. We're going to talk about this card coming up, which is a good card. Mexico City, you got Moreno versus Erceg, a really, really good, main card. Actually, let's talk about last week real quick. A couple of these fights I just want to go over. We didn't have a great week. We had a stretch where we were about 3-4 week winning streak, and then we're now on 3 fight losing streak. Not by much. I mean, it's not like we're down a unit here, but they're just little things. Last week, the week before, it kind of sucks, but the judges kind of pulled a few away from us. This week, a couple of them were my reads, but a couple of them were also, I would do it again just for the value. The Leon Edwards, I honestly think that was a bad read on my end. I should have known better than to trust Leon Edwards. Sometimes you get caught up with he was a champion. He's beat so many guys. He's been in a better level of competition. It's over there on his side of the pond. But then you don't kind of factor in, like, how many times has Leon Edwards actually broke in the cage mentally? He was broken against Usman. If he didn't catch that lucky kick, that fight was going completely sideways for him. How hungry is he? You know what I mean? So there were certain factors I probably could have factored in a little better. I take that. As far as the Gunnar Nelson pick, I would probably pick him again. I got to be honest with you. I'd probably pick him again. I mean, the value on that, plus 200 to me was worth it. When you're going against a guy that in Kevin Holland, who usually is the one getting submitted, and then you get a guy in Gunnar Nelson who's a third-degree black belt under Renzo Gracie, and you actually know that's what he's going to go for. To me, it's worth a plug. He actually almost sealed the submission up at one point in time. But he ended up losing that fight. Molly McCann retired. I don't know why they made a big stink about it, to be honest with you. I mean, I respect her. I think she's fun. She's fan-friendly, but she never really did nothing in the sport to deserve, like, the gloves being put down and this big, hoopla. Maybe it was because on her side of the pond. Jordan Vucenic, we got to start thinking he's a bust, this kid, man. I mean, I'm actually shocked that Chris Duncan beat him. From what I've seen from him in Cage Warriors and the way he fought against Kuta Daladze. But now when you watch the Kuta Daladze fight, it's kind of interesting, right? Because after Kuta Daladze fought this week, you kind of look at the Vucenic fight and you're like, well, maybe he's not that good if Kuta Daladze beat him. So, I think he's this dude got a tattoo of the UFC on his body and shit. Like, I don't know what he's doing, but he's got a lot of work to make up. The one really, really bright spot was Nathaniel Wood we had. A lot of people were on Charrier. I just thought that Nathaniel Wood would be faster, and his only downside would be to protect his chin. He had to protect his chin, because if he protects his chin, if you guys are metric guys and you look at the numbers thrown per round, he's just a much more voluminous guy. He's a much more active fighter, and Charrier kind of sits back. He looks for that big piping shot. So if he doesn't get that big shot, where is he winning on the cards? So Nathaniel Wood at plus 180 was a good play from Fight Brain. Fight Brain threw that one out. The Kavanaugh, another fight. A lot of people had DeSantos. I love this kid Kavanaugh. I love this kid. I think he's a good wrestler. He's got good cardio. He's got a good chin. He's got, good striking, sharp hands. Love that. We were on the right side of the Tybura fight. So overall, I mean, pick-wise, it was okay. It was just a couple of the bets we were on the wrong side of. But we're going to try to make it up this week. We got a big stretch of good cards coming up, so I'm looking forward to that. Let's jump into the main event. We're going to go Brandon Moreno and Steve Erceg. Now, for a while, I was thinking Steve Erceg was kind of fighting over his head, right? I like him. I think he's really, really good. But when he came into the UFC, he beat Dvorak, he beat Alessandro Costa, he beat Matt Schell. 3 guys that are good, but very, very, very beatable. Like, they're very beatable. But he was beating them decisively. Like, he looked really, really good coming in. He's got, like, a very Ryan Hall-ish type demeanor. And it's hard not to like the kid. I'll be honest with you, it's hard not to like the kid. And before that, he only lost 1 fight, like, even on the regionals and stuff like that. So the kid was putting in work at Eternal MMA and stuff like that. Then he comes up and he takes a huge step up in competition against Alexander Pantoja, and he loses the decision. But he fought well. Like, he actually fought well in that fight. There were some people that maybe argued, they said maybe I don't think he won that fight. I think it was a clear Pantoja win. But there were some people that honestly thought maybe, I mean, he fought so valiantly, even in a loss, that he gained so much respect. Then he comes back and he fights Kai Kara-France. And I think the world was on Erceg in that fight. I was on Erceg. I was like, he proved to me. He went 5 rounds with, Pantoja in a valiant effort. I don't see a world where he doesn't beat Kai Kara-France. I mean, I know Kai Kara-France is fast and stuff like that, but, I mean, he looked so durable and he looked like so tight and crisp as boxing. I said, he just has to avoid some kicks and find his way in, get some dirty boxing going, and I think he's fine. It's kind of like Kai Kara-France has any kind of grappling pedigree. And he gets knocked out in the first round, early in the first round by Kai Kara-France. So now you could chalk that up to a fluke. You could chalk that up to maybe the war with Pantoja took something from him. You could chalk it up to just a major, mistake that he made. You could chalk it up to a lot of things. But you can also chalk it up to maybe he's a really, really good fighter, but he's not at that level. You know what I mean? Like, if you look at all the guys, I like Matt Schnell. I think he's really good, but he's chinny. Alessandro Costa, Dvorak, good fighters, but they're not that top guy. They're not going to fight for a belt anytime in their career. And then all of a sudden now you get 2 guys that are, a champion and a title contender, and you lose to both of them. You got to start questioning, like, okay, maybe he's really, really, really good, but maybe he's not like that elite, level. And I think it's a valid, question and concern to ask. And then, coming in against a guy like Brandon Moreno, who, sure, he's not super young, but he's been through it. This guy's been through wars. He's been through a lot of wars in his young age. But if you look at the level of opposition that this guy fought, Amir Albazi, Brendan Royval, Alex Pantoja, Deiveson Figueiredo, Kai France, Deiveson Figueiredo, I feel like he fought him for half of his career. Brendan Royval, Jussier Formiga, Kai France, Alexander Pantoja, and Sergio Pettis, Dustin Ortiz, Ryan Benoit, Louis Smolka. Like, he has fought everybody. He's fought everybody, and he won the. This is a guy who he left the UFC after a bad start in the very beginning. It was so odd the way it happened because he won 3 straight in the UFC, then he lost 2 straight, and after he lost those 2 straight, he left and he went over to LFA. Had a big win in LFA, and he comes back. He fights Askarov, and he's been at the UFC ever since. So it was kind of weird. Like it's almost like he just went to LFA to kick some cobwebs off, to work on some new things, and so it wouldn't affect him in the UFC manner. And then he ends up coming back. He becomes the champion, defends his belt multiple times, and then obviously he lost it to Alexander Pantoja. Comes back, he fights Brandon Royval. He loses a split decision in that fight, and then he comes back and he fights Amir Albazi in his last fight, where a lot of people start to question him, and is his durability still there? Is his heart still there? The scar tissue buildup and the way he cuts, and is he the same guy? And he looked great against Albazi. He looked really, really good against Albazi. But my only concern with him is even though you look at his record and you're like 22-8, it's an extended record, but it's not like we just said, George Foreman, 76-5, but he's taking a lot of damage. And that's a legitimate concern when you look at a guy like, Alpha Boy. I think that's his nickname, Alpha Boy. He didn't take that kind, he didn't accumulate that kind of damage. So it's definitely a concern for me, but this is also a fight where, you have him going to be on, easy. Fan base is going to be pretty much his. This is a big spot for him. It's a big spot for Erceg. This is like more of a proving ground spot for Erceg. He's got to get this one. He's got his back against the wall, 2 straight losses. You lose to 3 contenders or former champions, it's really not a good look. You got to beat one of them, to prove your worth. It's not I don't think it's a cuttable offense for Erceg, but one more, it could be 100%. But I still like Moreno here. I do. I still like Moreno here. I just think that Erceg is a really good fighter. That had some really good performances and showed some really good skill, and he is good, but I just don't think he's on Moreno's level. I think if Moreno comes in, dialed in, looking like Brandon Moreno, I think he wins this fight. Probably by decision. I don't think he'll knock him out. So I think this will be a 5-round decision for Brandon Moreno, maybe 3 rounds to 2, 4 rounds to 1. Manuel Torres and Drew Dober. This is a really interesting fight to me. When you put the pieces together of this and you think about Manuel Torres and you think about what makes him so popular, what makes him so fun, it's that he's a young kid, he's got pretty nasty striking, and he gets his work done really quick. When you go through his resume, even on his loss to Ignacio Bahamondes, round 1 knockout, loses. Chris Duncan, round 1 submission, wins. Nicholas Mota, round 1 knockout. Frank Camacho, round 1. Colton England, round 1. Carlos Canada, round 1. Daniel Vega, round 1. Round 1. It's all round 1. Every one of his wins is round 1 except for one. And that one took place in Boma 3, split decision in 2018. So he's got 18 fights. In 18 fights, only one of them has been out of the first round. Think about that. That's something that's great, but that's also something that's a cause of concern. It's got to be a cause of concern. I know Drew Dober's chin hasn't been the greatest lately. I know it's not like what it once was. We're gonna talk about that with Gastelum, the same thing. I know he's 36 years old. I know all of that, but at the end of the day, his chin is a lot better than a lot of the guys in that division, even when it's chinked, even when it's been tested, even when it seems like it's getting a little fragile. like he's still Drew Dober. Still trains in elevation, still has decent cardio, still has good boxing, still can wrestle when he wants to, still a big frame, still a veteran. He got knocked out by Silva, Gene Silva, but Gene Silva's been knocking anybody out, and that was a doctor stoppage. That was a doctor stoppage. That wasn't like a clean knockout. Renato Carnera decision. He beat Rick Glenn. He got knocked out by Frivola. No shame in that. Beat Bobby Green. Beat Rafael Alves. Terrence McKinney. Lost to Brad Riddell. Lost to Islam Makhachev in the third round by submission. So he's like, he's fought a lot of good guys. He's beat a lot of good guys. He's only been knocked out, 3 times. Like, people are like, oh my God, he's so chinny. He's been knocked out 3 times in his career in about 40 fights. I mean, it's not, okay, so the TKO doctor stoppage, I'm kind of letting that go. I'm going to push that to the side. So the last time he got knocked out was Matt Frivola in 2023. And then he got knocked out in... Well, I got to go all the way down here. Then he got knocked out in 2011 against Romero Hernandez. So technically, how chinny is he? Like, how chinny is he? Now, listen, I'm not saying that he can't get submitted by Manuel Torres. I'm not saying he can't get knocked out by him. Of course he could. Manuel Torres, this is what he does. He's a first round. But what happens if this thing gets out of the first round? Like, what happens if Dober's chin holds up? What happens if his wrestling holds up? What happens if this doesn't go to the ground? Manuel Torres, or what happens if he just exerts so much energy? Now we're in this, like, this zone of and listen, I'm a big Manuel Torres guy. I love Manuel Torres. But this fight actually scares me a little bit for him. That I don't know. Like, Drew Dober's the type of guy that you get out of the first round with him, and he brings you into that second round. Like, I have no idea what I'm going to see from Manuel Torres. Not to mention, Drew Dober can crack, too. Don't think that Drew Dober can't crack. The guy's got 14 knockouts and 27 wins. So he could crack, too. So I think this is a dangerous fight for Manuel Torres. I think that Drew Dober coming, in with 2 straight losses, it's an important fight for him and his career. Manuel Torres coming back from a knockout in Inacio Bahamondes in the first round. It's also not as detrimental to him because, like I said, he's still 30 years old, 31 years old. He's still kind of young. He's kind of still blooming in the sport, but he does not want to go down too nub and then go into a fight, and possibly having your back against the wall for a third loss. So I think this is, I just think that people are sleeping on Drew Dober in this spot. I think this is all going to be predicated on how much gas Manuel Torres spits out in the first round. If he comes out like a bat out of hell to try to prove a point because he was knocked out by Inacio Bahamondes and he wants to get back on track and maybe get a performance bonus, and he lets his hands just fly and he's trying to get takedowns or he's trying to just do all this chaotic stuff in the first round, I can see a world where he starts gassing out and Drew Dober takes over the fight. So it's a very, very coin flip fight for me. Really, really is. This is a really, really tough one to call. So I'm going to either say Manuel Torres gets it done early or Drew Dober gets it done late here. I would not be shocked in any way, shape, or form if Drew Dober ends up knocking him out in like the second or third round. I would not be. First round, if you tell me there's a first round finish, I'll probably say, yeah, Torres got it done. But anything after that live line starts making me want to bet, Dober. It's almost like if Manuel Torres comes out and literally puts it on him for a round, all offense all the time, and Dober didn't take that much punishment, but he absolutely lost that round. But you had Manuel Torres exerting a lot of energy. That's a spot where I'm saying, look, he's already the dog, and he's even more of a dog now because he just lost round 1. That's a live bet, this bad boy. See what happens. See what this kid has in the second round. See what he has in the third. We've never seen it. So it really, really interesting spot there. Really, really interesting spot. Part of me wants to lean towards Torres just because he's younger. I think the UFC knows what they got in Dober. I don't think he's making a title run anytime soon. I think he is on the decline. Manuel Torres is only going to continue to get better. So there's a part of me that wants to pick Torres here, but there's a part of me that just wants to lean on Dober. So I'm just going to, for shits and giggles from a pick perspective, I'm going to take Drew Dober in this one to get it done by late finish. We're going to jump over to Mackenzie now to do her Dog pick of the week.
C-Rod has been quite the spoiler, from stepping stone to throat stepper. Even though he did have a blip in his last fight, he does have a chance to redeem himself against a very high-octane grappler who has a thirst for the neck. However, Costa does seem to lose steam in the later rounds, and with the high altitude, this can really pull at his conditioning strings. So give me C-Rod to weaponize that cardio to get through this one and take it on the cards. So give me C-Rod at -150.
Kelvin Gastelum and Joe Pyfer. This fight's really interesting to me because if you really think about it, who has Joe Pyfer fought? Who has Joe Pyfer really fought? Listen, I like Joe Pyfer. I think Joe Pyfer's a good fighter. I think he's overhyped. I think he's overrated. I think he got exposed by Jack Hermanson, but he's very big for the division, and he hits like a ton of bricks. But at the end of the day, when you look at his resume, he's beating guys that he should beat. He goes on a Contender Series, he wins that fight. Then he comes back, he fights Alan Almadovsky, beats him. Mearchart. I mean, you're either getting submitted by Mearchart, or you're knocking him out. ARA, another guy. He's either knocking you out or you're knocking him out. Jack Hermanson, that was the test. I actually picked Jack Hermanson against him, but that was the test. Like, Jack Hermanson's a guy who's going to bring a decent striking style, but he's going to bring a wrestling game. He's going to bring pressure. He's going to bring cardio. He's going to bring a veteran savvy. He never took a ton of damage. Like, that was a perfect test for Pyfer, and he failed. And he failed the test. And then and he failed it pretty miserably. That wasn't a close fight. That wasn't a fight where you're like, could have went either way. No, that was a clear Jack Hermanson win. Then he comes back and he fights Marc-André Barriault. And listen, Barriault's a tough guy. I'm not saying he's not a tough guy, but Barriault's going to give him exactly what he wants. He's going to give him a firefight. He's going to give him something on the feet where Pyfer's going to have the opportunity to land that shot. So I wasn't impressed by that. So overall, I haven't been super impressed by his career so far. I'm impressed by his wins, the way I'm impressed by his size, his stature, how big he is for the division. I'm impressed by those things. But he hasn't really wowed me. Has he wowed you? Like, where has Joe Pyfer really wowed you? He hasn't really wowed me. So now he's taking on Kelvin Gastelum. And Kelvin Gastelum is a very durable fighter. Despite what you say about him getting knocked down and his chin is going on him, yes, it probably is going on him a little bit. He relied on his chin way too long in his career. But if you look at it, he's still young. He's still 33 years old. He's 19-9. He's got a good... Now, if you watched that fight against, Sean Brady, which is a good fight to watch because you just saw Sean Brady fight, so it's in your mind. You saw what he did to Leon Edwards. And you watched that fight. Sure, he beat Kelvin Gastelum, but there were situations in that fight where Kelvin Gastelum was able to reverse some, position, get on top of him, end the round on top with some nasty punches. Like, he did do some nice things in that fight. There wasn't like a Leon Edwards performance where you're like, oh, he took him down. This is where the fight's going to end. No, he took him down. Kelvin was able to get out of some bad situations and get into an advantageous situation. Sure, did he lose by submission? Yeah, but it kind of aged well, that fight. Kind of aged well. My biggest issue with Gastelum here is this. You never know two things. You don't know what Gastelum you're going to get, because sometimes you get a really dialed-in Gastelum, you get a really clocked-in Gastelum, you get a guy who really wants it. And when you get that guy, he could beat anybody in the division. Kelvin Gastelum can beat anybody in the division when you get that devoted, dedicated guy. But when you don't get that guy, he could lose to anybody in the division. So picking his fights has become very, very hard, especially in this state of the game. I know he went to the Performance Center. He got all these physical tests done to see where his O2s were and his conditioning and his they did all these metric counts on his volume and, so he's got all that down. And apparently they're formulating a whole new game plan for him using those metrics and that data, which I don't personally agree with for the most part. Like, I'm not going to let some computer system and all these little high technologies talk to me and tell me how I'm going to train a guy and game plan and blueprint for him. But it shows initiative and it shows that they're trying new things, which that I like. You're trying new things. Even if they don't take all that data and they don't take all that technology and they just take bits and pieces of it and say, well, listen, we can work on stuff here, then that's good. I wouldn't take the whole envelope and be like, all right, well, this is what it says we should do. This is what it says we should eat. No, I would not do that. There's something to be said about, doing things with human touch. with human eyes. That's why these people with these robot judges, I'll never forget that. I was embarrassing to see some of these analysts and touts on Twitter or X, whatever you call it now, saying we need robot judges. Like, I was actually embarrassed for us as a group. Like, how can you sit there and say that you want robot judging? How can you want to take the human element out of it when you can't see the damage, when you can't see with the optics, you can't see that stuff. You can only see numbers. So all you can see is numbers. And there were people calling for it. And I was screaming from mountaintops. I was like, it's never going to happen. You're never going to have a complete AI system where there's going to be no humans around the apron of the cage or the apron of the ring. It's just not going to happen. You need human element. You need that the human eye, the human optics to point out things that computers just can't point out. And it's the same thing when it comes to your blueprinting of your game plan. Like, there are human elements in there that you need to implement. You need to have optics and eyes on it. But I do like that he is taking it seriously. My problem with this fight is this. Do I think Gastelum can beat him? 1,000%. I think if Gastelum comes in on his game, he absolutely can beat him. He absolutely can beat Joe Pyfer. But the size of Joe Pyfer is the issue for me. If Joe Pyfer wants to do certain things with him, I think he can. This is all really, honestly, I got to be honest with you. I don't think this is predicated on Gastelum's game plan as much as it is Pyfer's game plan. I think Pyfer's game plan is either going to win or lose him this fight. I'm not a big advocate of him thinking that he's going to stand and trade with Gastelum at range. If he wants to get inside, dirty box with him a little bit, that's fine because he'll be able to muscle him around. He's 6'1" to 5'8". I think Gastelum is 5'9". So you got a guy 6'1" and 5'. That's a big difference. He could really monopolize him in the in the pocket. So that concerns me a little bit. But this is really going to boil down to his game planning, because I could see a world. There's no way that Gastelum should be a plus 350. There's no way. And when I first saw the line came out, I was like, this is insane. And there was a part of me that wanted to stab it, and I was like, let me see what happens with this line. And it ended up getting steamed the other way. People started betting Gastelum. So now Gastelum's line's down 120 points. From what it was. So people saw what I saw. They're like, yeah, Joe Pyfer should win, but if you're giving me, 4-1 odds on Gastelum, how do you not take that? So that's another thing I always talk about is the value. Sometimes you got to stop thinking about like good bet, bad bet. There are good bets that hit that are bad bets. There are. Like, if you were to go in and take Joe Pyfer at -400 or -500 and it wins, call it what you want. Okay, I won. That's a bad bet. That's just a bad bet. Like, you don't bet Joe Pyfer at -500 against Kelvin Gastelum. You don't bet anybody really in fighting at that price. So that's not a good bet. Even if you tie it into a parlay, that's not a good bet. It's just not. But if you told me that you took Kelvin Gastelum and he lost, and I'm like, well, what'd you get your odds at? And you're at +400. I'm like, it's a good bet. It's a good bet. So sometimes you can't look at the record on the night. You can't look at your units at the end of the night, because chances are if you go through them again, you'll be like, I would probably place that bet again. There was value on that. Some would say that there was value on Leon Edwards last week, but after watching the fight, you're like, there was really no value on it. But someone like Gastelum, like when you look at this fight, you're like, +400. I mean, -400. Where? Like, where is this a -400 fight? There's just none. There's anybody who even puts this in a parlay, I think it's absolutely maniacal. I'm leaning Joe Pyfer just for the mere fact that, like I said, he's the fresher fighter. He's the bigger fighter. He should be able to monopolize certain positions in there. But it's all boils down to his game plan. But I'll be honest with you, I'll be rooting for Kevin Gastelum. I want Kevin Gastelum to win this fight. I was always a Kevin Gastelum fan. I always thought he was a really good fighter that was not misunderstood, but just Kelvin Gastelum has to want to be there. That's his problem. And there's a lot of fighters like that, but when you're on the level that he's at, it's magnified more, because when you see a fight like he had with Izzy, you're like, he wanted to be there that night. Like, that night he wanted to be there. So when you see a performance like that and then he fights anybody else, and you're like, what the fuck was that? Then there's just so much of a gap. When you see the lower end guys fighting lower end guys, you're like, all right, well, he had a good performance here, bad performance here. But when you see what he's capable of, what he's been capable of in his career, and then he comes down and has a stinker, then you're like, what is he doing? Does he even want to be here? So it's very magnified because he had so many great performances in his career against so many great guys, and he showed so much durability and dog and you know, that when he has these lapses in performances, you can only narrow it down to: did he take his weight cut seriously? Did he take his camp seriously? Does he want to be here? Why is he here? So it's been the biggest thing of Gastelum's career, and it's been the thorn of his side. Because if he had the mindset that he had in the Izzy fight in every one of his fights, you're looking at a champion. You're looking at a guy who absolutely has the ability to be a champion. And now the window's closing. You know, now the window's closing. He's 33 years old. He's still young, but he's 33, a damaged 33. He took he's been in the shop. You know, so, you know, it's now or never for him. He beats a guy like Joe Pyfer and goes on a 2-fight win streak, you know, beating Daniel Rodriguez and then coming out and beating Joe Pyfer. He's right back in the mix of things. Like, he's right back. This is he loses here, and I think he kind of goes away for a little bit. But he wins here, and you got to start talking about him. He just beat Joe Pyfer. You got to start talking about Kelvin Gastelum, giving him that next, you know, big fight. And I think if he beats Joe Pyfer, just fighting Joe Pyfer, if this fight doesn't get you up, no fight's going to get you up, because Joe Pyfer's a very, very beatable fighter. He's very beatable. There's no reason why Kelvin shouldn't beat him, you know, when he's really on his mark. But I'm going to lean Pyfer, but I'm pulling for Gastelum. So this is, to me, is a 50-50 fight, especially if Gastelum's chin holds up. Forget about it. But good fight. These are just all things, guys. Listen, these are all things I'm trying to give you to consider. I'm not trying to tell you who to pick. I'm not trying to tell you who I think. These are things that you just need to consider. Raul Rosas and Vince Morales. You know, the UFC just listen. I like Vince Morales. I think he's a good fighter, but you know, this is a guy who literally, I think the UFC is just like stage baiting him at this point. You know, they put him in all these fights, late notice. Against all these big prospects. They're not putting them against these prospects to say, hey man, go in there, beat this guy so we can elevate you a little bit. No, they're putting them against these guys so they can elevate on him. You know what I mean? Elijah Smith, another guy that he just fought, he ends up losing to him. They're trying to elevate him. Taylor Lapilus, I guess that was just a, you know, whatever style fight, but you know, he's good. He's beating some good guys. He's beat Hunter Azor. He's a solid fighter, solid striking. He's like a step below Christian Rodriguez. Christian Rodriguez he's good at everything. Vince Morales is okay at everything, you know, and that's solid. He's fighting Raul Rojas, who I don't like. I don't, there's nothing about this kid that impresses me. The only thing that impresses me is that he's 20 years old, and he's fighting on the big stage with the big boys, and he has a, you know, winning record. He's beating guys. But he's not beating anybody remotely impressive. Remotely impressive. I mean, look at when, you know, he loses to C-Rod. That was the one guy that he beat, that he lost to, that was impressive. C-Rod beat him. He lost to Terrence Mitchell. They brought him in. They brought Terrence Mitchell in to fight him. He's not a UFC fighter. They brought him in to fight him. He beats Ricky Turcios, who I don't think anybody's really high on. And Ori. He beat Ori by decision. So it's like, does he beat Vince Morales? I mean, I guess he should. He probably should, right? Vince Morales, again, getting caught in this trap. But I would not be shocked if Vince Morales pulls it off or makes it a dogfight. I wouldn't be shocked at all. Maybe he's sick of being the stepping stone. Maybe he's going to, you know, step on the gas this time and really bring it to Rosas. I don't know. Like, this is a tough fight for me to call, too, because I'm not high on Raul Rosas. I know what the UFC is trying to do with this kid. They're really walking him slow. But eventually, you're going to run into a buzzsaw. I mean, you're going to run into somebody on that night that's going to beat you, almost like Gable Stevenson did, you know, in the NCAAs this weekend. You know, he ran into a buzzsaw. He ran into a kid who literally wrestles and wrestles and wrestles and wrestles while Gable Stevenson is doing WWE. He's playing football. He won his Olympic medal. You know, he probably just said, I'm coming back. I'm going to come back and I'm going to win myself, you know, another national title. And he fought a kid that doesn't worry about the WWE. He's not worried about NFL. He's not going out and branching off and doing all these things. This kid's in a hot gym, wrestling, saying, I'm going to go in here. I don't care who it is. I'm not going to be denied. So you got to wonder, like, that's what happens. Sometimes you do run into that buzzsaw. They don't have to be better than you. The better fighter doesn't always win. But it just could be a point in time where you get caught. You start, drinking your own juice. You get hyped up on yourself. You know that the company is kind of pushing you and giving you these very winnable fights. And then eventually you go in there and you're down 1-0 on the scorecards. Then you're down 2-0 on the scorecards. And all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, I got to get a finish. And it doesn't accumulate and you lose. So I would not put any stock in Raul Rosas Jr. I do think he should win this fight, probably maybe by submission sometime late. But this is another fight. I would sit back and be like, I would not be shocked at all if Vince Morales wins. So, yeah, great card, man. We got a lot of good cards. If you want all my picks, all my predictions, go to the MadLabMMA.com. Come check us out over there. The Fight Brain, once again, that's seems to be the tool. I mean, that seems to be the tool. Everybody's using the Fight Brain. There's a couple guys in there that literally bet all the fucking dogs of the Fight Brain, and some of them plus 2,600, plus 700, plus 400, plus 1, and they hit. This thing is a really, really, really high-end tool. Plus, you get my breakdowns along with that. Me and Fight Brain go head-to-head every week. So they have Fight Brain has its picks. I have my picks. It gives a full detailed breakdown why it likes what it likes, and then I give you my breakdown why I like what I like. Full DFS, wagering blueprint, live stream before the fight, plus boxing. If there's boxing that week that I really like, then we run it through there as well. So definitely come check us out. Now's the time to do it. We got a really good stretch of fights coming up, and I'll talk to you later.